Whenever we are thinking about music or watching tutorials about songwriting and production, a lot is about adding elements. But what if the space that we leave in between notes is actually what makes or breaks a song, what creates groove or kills the groove? What do you think? Today we're gonna take a look at Groovy K-Pop Songs and find out why the space is what's crucial to creating great grooves. But first, what even are groovy songs? Well, you probably know one of these songs. All of these songs are what we consider groovy songs. Before we talk about the space and the groove, let's quickly talk about beats per minute, or also known as BPM. While there are songs that are a little bit slower, or a little bit faster, most groovy songs have a mid-tempo around 120 BPM. Let's also quickly touch on which instruments and sound choices you should be making if you want to make a groovy song. For the drums, the Oliver sample packs are your best friend. They are perfect for any disco song or just generally pop songs. For the bass, there's multiple options you can take. The classic would be the electric bass. But you can also go for a synth moog bass. Clean house bass, a distorted house bass, or a distorted synth bass. Keep in mind that for the most part you want to pick bass sounds that can both be played in short staccato-ish notes but also can sustain a little longer when needed, as using different lengths of notes is really important when it comes to creating groove. Within the pre-chorus and the bridge you can however use much different bass sounds or not even use bass sounds at all, as you want to create great contrast before the chorus. Now that we know which drum sounds and bass sounds we want to use, let's see how we should be using them. For the drums, you want fairly consistent and very simple patterns. Here's 3 very common patterns used in groovy songs. The first one is just 4 kicks, 1 kick on every beat. It doesn't get simpler than that. The second one is the kick on the 1 and 3 and the snare on the 2 and 4, also known as the backbeat and the upbeat. And the third is the combination of both, kicks on every beat and the snare on the 2 and the 4. Alright, let's now talk about bass lines, and for that, let's take a listen to LE SSERAFIM's Blue Flame. We've recreated just the drums and the bass line of this track. As you can hear, Blue Flame is using one of the 3 patterns that we just mentioned. In this case, for the verse, the 1 kick on every beat pattern. This pattern works really well, as there's enough space in between the kicks to play around with, but also enough kicks to ground us and to keep things consistent. Let's now talk about the bass line. Before we dive into what makes this bass line so groovy, let's quickly talk about which notes you should be using. The answer to this question is fairly simple. For 99% of times, the root note of the chords are your friend. Now, what makes this bass line so groovy is the kick and bass relationship and the space between the individual notes. As you can see, there are a lot of bass notes that are hitting together with the kick drum, but there's also notes that come after the kick drum, slightly before the kick drum, or in between kicks. It's those notes that create the groove of the bass line. Now keep in mind that depending on whether you pick the pattern with 2 or 4 kicks, there will be more or less space in between the kicks available to you to play around. In both cases, be careful with how many notes you add, as it can quickly become too much. Simplicity is key. You might want notes between kicks, you might want notes right after the kick or right before it, but also make sure that there's still a lot of space left in between, because that's ultimately what creates the groove. Also make sure that you repeat certain themes and patterns within the bass line itself. If you had one bass note right after the kick in the first bar, try to repeat that exact rhythm and pattern in the next bars, but maybe change the second half of the bar, and so on. As you can see, Blue Flame's bassline does exactly that as well. It's the mix between repetition and small changes that creates a groovy bassline. Also keep in mind that you can play around with short and long notes, they will change the groove massively. As you might remember, we mentioned 3 different patterns that you can opt into when creating groovy songs. So let's just take this bassline and add some snares on the 2 and the 4, known as the backbeat and the upbeat, and listen to how this changes the groove and feel of the bassline and the track. A common production technique is also layering the 4th beat, also known as the upbeat, with a clap or multiple clap samples, often with reverb tails, just to further enhance that last snare hit. A cool trick is to slightly offset the clap samples with the snare sample, as you can see here, to make the hit feel even bigger. To further enhance the groove, we can also add hi-hats and a cymbal hit right at the first beat, the downbeat. The other drum pattern we mentioned was the 2 kick and 2 snare pattern. As we mentioned earlier, we want contrast in the pre-chorus when it comes to the choice of instruments. This is also the case for the rhythm. Long-held bass notes will be your best friend in the pre-chorus. If you want, you can also add some cool disco drum fills.
Once again, we have songs with a more singy A chorus and an ad-libbed B chorus. Honestly, you encounter this a lot in various styles and concepts, as it often works pretty well. Oftentimes the B chorus is the same as the intro, and it is just an ad-libbed melodic line. These are also very good to illustrate syncopation, as they play with the space between the 2 beats in a similar ways to the bass line. However, songs which have a strong rhythmic bass lend themselves to a very interesting style of chorus. You guessed it, the anti-drop. We have a pre-chorus as usual, where we build the energy up and lead the listener to an explosion. However, here we subvert their expectations and instead, well, hear it for yourselves. Want us to go into anti-drops in more detail? We're covering that topic very soon, so stay tuned. Anti-drop choruses have a particular A chorus where the vocals are very soft and airy. In some groovy songs we have a mix of soft and strong vocals. Oftentimes the rap also plays with the groove. These songs have a slightly more mature vibe. They're often about love, but not through the lens of a teenager, but rather someone more experienced. Think bar instead of the beach party from our last video. Oftentimes these themes can go into more dark directions, sometimes even playfully dark. They can also be a bit more focused on the singer's character rather than on someone else, and on their place in the world, often with an empowering twist. we've helped you understand groove a little bit better, and you can now use this video and your favorite songs to inspire you to make something of your own. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and see you next time for our breakdown of the infamous anti-drop.